talk about the Pope. Last week we talked about Italy and the Leaning Tower and the Colosseum. Um, at least the Roman Colosseum and the Leaning Tower. Today we're talking about the Pope, who's very big in Italy anyway, because they're from their main capital, Rome. So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome and the head of the worldwide Catholic Church. The Bishop of Rome, also known as the Pope, is also known as the Supreme Pontiff, the Roman Pontiff, and or Sovereign Pontiff. And from the 8th century onward until 1870, the Pope was the sovereign or head of the states of the Papal States, and since 1929, of the much smaller Vatican City state. Okay, I went too far down here. Now, from a Catholic viewpoint, the primacy of the Bishop of Rome is largely derived from his role as the apostolic successor to Saint Peter, and to whom primacy was conferred by Jesus, who gave Peter the keys of heaven and the powers of binding and loosing, naming him as the rock upon which the church will be built. And the current Pope is Leo the 16th, who was elected on May 8th of last year, on the second day of the 2025 Papal Conclave, and he's the only Pope to be born in Illinois, in Chicago. All the other popes were from different countries, but Pope Leo is the only one to be born in the United States, and no less in Chicago, Illinois. While his office is called the papacy, the jurisdiction of the episcopal see is called the Holy See. The word see comes from the Latin word for seat or chair, referring in particular to the one on which the newly elected pope sits during the enthronement ceremony. The Holy See is a sovereign entity under international law. It is headquartered in the distinctively independent Vatican City, a city-state which forms a geographical enclave with the conurbation of Rome. It was established by the Lateran Treaty in 1929 between Fascist Italy and the Holy See to ensure its political and spiritual independence. Now, the Holy See is recognized by its adherents of various levels to international organizations and by means of its diplomatic relations and political accords with many independent states. Now, I'm going to be taking notes here too. I didn't really go anywhere in the last day or two except for to the doctor because I injured myself yesterday at work, so I have to stay home and rest my ankle, which I hurt yesterday. Then I got 15 hours of training videos to watch for my new job, which I'm gonna have my weekend, like today and tomorrow, kind of booked after I get this video put out. Now, according to Catholic tradition, the apostolic see of Rome was founded by Saint Peter and Saint Paul in the 1st century. Now, the papacy is one of the longest enduring institutions in the world, and it has been a prominent force in human history. Now, in ancient times, the popes helped spread Christianity and intervened to find resolutions in various doctrinal disputes. Now, in the Middle Ages, the popes played a key role of secular importance in Western Europe, often acted as arbitrators between Christian monarchs. In addition to the expansion of Christian faith and doctrine, modern popes are involved in ecumenism and interfaith dialogue, charitable work, and the defense of human rights. Now, when it comes to the first person to ever be pope, they have Saint Peter listed as being the first pope. Now, over time, the papacy accrued broad secular and political influence, eventually rivaling those of territorial rulers. In recent centuries, the temporal authority of the papacy has declined, and the office is now largely focused on religious matters. Now, by contrast, papal claims of spiritual authority have been increasingly firmly expressed over time, culminating in 1870 with the proclamation of the dogma of papal infallibility for rare occasions and when the Pope speaks ex cathedra, literally from the chair of St. Peter. To issue a formal definition of faith or morals, the Pope is considered to be one of the world's most powerful people outside of the presidency due to the extensive diplomatic, cultural, and spiritual influence of his position on both 1.4 billion Catholics and those outside the Catholic faith, and because he heads the world's largest non-government provider of education and healthcare with a vast network of charities. Now, the word Pope derives from ancient Greek, meaning from the word Papus, meaning father in the early centuries of Christianity. Now, this title was applied, especially in the East, to all bishops and other senior clergy, and later became reserved in the West to the Bishop of Rome during the reign of Pope Leo I, who ruled from the year 440 to the year 461. A reservation made official only in the 11th century, and the earliest record of the use of the title of Pope was in regard to the by then deceased Patriarch of Alexandria, Heracles, who ruled from 232 to 248. The earliest recorded use of the title Pope in English dates to the mid 10th century, when it was used in reference to the 7th century Roman Pope Vitalian in an Old English translation of Bede's Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorium. Now, the Catholic Church teaches that the pastoral office, the office of shepherding the church, that was held by the apostles as a group or college with Saint Peter as their head, is now held by their successors, the bishops, with the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, as their head, and this gives rise to another title by which the Pope is known, Supreme Pontiff. The Catholic Church teaches that Jesus personally appointed Peter as the visible head of the Church, and that the Catholic Church's dogmatic constitution, Lumen Gentium, makes a clear distinction between apostles and bishops, presenting the latter as the successors of the former, and with the Pope as successor of Peter, and that he is head of the bishops as Peter was head of the apostles. Some historians argue against the notion that Peter was the first bishop of Rome, noting that the episcopal see in Rome can be traced back to no earlier than the 3rd century. The writings of Irenaeus, a church father who wrote around the year 180 AD, reflect the belief that Peter founded and organized the Church of Rome. Moreover, Irenaeus was not the first to write of Peter's presence in the early Roman Church, but the Church of Rome wrote in a letter to the Corinthians, which is traditionally attributed to Clement of Rome, circa around the year 96. About the persecution of Christians in Rome as the struggles in our time, and presented to the Corinthians as heroes. Now, first, the greatest and most just columns, the good apostles Peter and Paul. Ignatius of Antioch wrote shortly after Clement. And in his letter from the city of Smyrna to the Romans, he said he would not command them as Peter and Paul did, but given this and other evidence, such as Emperor Constantine's the erection of the old St. Peter's basilica on the location of St. Peter's tomb, as head and given to him by Rome's Christian community, many scholars agree that Peter was martyred in Rome under Nero, although some scholars argue that he may have been martyred in Palestine. Even though it's open to historical debate, the first century Christian communities may have had a group of Presbyterians or Presbyterian bishops functioning as guides of their local churches. Gradually, episcopal sees were established in metropolitan areas. Antioch may have developed such a structure before Rome. In Rome, there were over time at various junctures rival claimants to be the rightful bishop, although again Irenaeus stressed the validity of one line of bishops from the time of St. Peter up to his contemporary Pope Victor I, and listed them. Some writers claim that the emergence of a single bishop in Rome probably did not occur until the middle of the 2nd century, but in their view, Linus, Cletus, and Clement were possibly prominent Presbyterian bishops. but they were not necessarily monarchical bishops. Now, documents in the 1st century and early 2nd century indicate that the Bishop of Rome had some kind of preeminence and prominence in the church as a whole, as even a letter from the bishop, or patriarch of Antioch, acknowledged the Bishop of Rome as a first among the equals, although the detail of what this meant is unclear. Let's go up here, and you're going to see. Now, this is the Pope from Chicago. This is Pope Leo, who's currently the Pope of Italy, and no less a Pope from Chicago, which is unheard of, because a lot of popes, like I said, don't come from Illinois or even from the United States. They all come from 4 different countries. Now, sources suggest at first that the terms Episcopos and Presbyterian were used interchangeably, and with the consensus among scholars being that by the turn of the 1st and 2nd centuries, local congregations were held, and they were led by bishops and Presbyterians whose duties of office overlapped, or they were indistinguishable from one another. Now, some say that there was probably no single monarchical bishop in Rome before the middle of the 2nd century, and likely maybe later on. Now, in the early Christian era, Rome and a few other cities had claims on the leadership of worldwide church. James the Just, known as the Brother of the Lord, served as head of the Jerusalem Church, which is still honored as the mother church in Orthodox tradition. Alexandria had been a center of Jewish learning, and became. Let's see if you guys can hear me. Let's turn this up a little bit. Checking to make sure you guys can hear me here. I just turned my volume all the way up. I know sometimes I forget to do that. Now, Alexandria had been the center of Jewish learning and became a center of Christian learning. Now, Rome had a large congregation early in the apostolistic period, when Paul the Apostle addressed in his epistle to the Romans, and according to tradition, Paul was martyred there. Now, during the 1st century of the church, which went between the year 30 and 130, between the years of 30 and 130, the Roman capital became recognized as a Christian center of exceptional importance. Now, the church there at the end of the century wrote an epistle to the church in Corinth, intervening in a major dispute and apologizing for not having taken action any earlier. There are a few other references of that time to recognition of the authoritative primacy of the Roman See outside of Rome. In the Ravenna document on October 13th of 2007, the theologians chosen by the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox churches stated, both sides agree that this canonical taxis was recognized by all in the era of the undivided church. Now, further, they agree that Rome, as the church that presides in love, according to the phrase of Ignatius of Antioch and to the Romans and the prologue, occupied the first place in the taxis, and that the Bishop of Rome was therefore the protos among the patriarchs. They disagree, however, on the interpretation of historical evidence from this era regarding the prerogatives of the Bishop of Rome as protos, a matter that was already understood in different ways in the first millennium. In the year AD 195, Pope Victor I, in what is seen as an exercise of Rome authority over the other churches, excommunicated the Decimans for observing Easter on the 14th of Nisan, the date of the Jewish Passover. A tradition handed down by John the Evangelist, see the Easter controversy, which I didn't even know that was a thing. Celebration of Easter on a Sunday, as insisted on by the Pope, is the system that has prevailed. Yeah, it's like every day you learn something new. Okay. Okay, there you go. The Edict of Milan in 313 granted freedom to all religions in the Roman Empire, and beginning the peace of the Church in 325, the First Council of Nicaea condemned Arianism, declaring Trinitarianism dogmatic, and I'm not sure if I'm saying those words right. And in its sixth canon, recognized the special role of the sees of Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch. Great defenders of Trinitarian faith included the popes, especially Liberius, who was exiled to Berea by Constantius II for his Trinitarian faith, Damasus I, and several other bishops. In the year 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declared Nicene Christianity to be the state religion of the empire, with the name Catholic Christians reserved for those who accepted that faith. Now, while the civil power in the Eastern Roman Empire controlled the church, and the Patriarch of Constantinople, the capital, wielded much power in the Western Roman Empire, the bishops of Rome were able to consolidate the influence and power they already possessed after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Barbarian tribes were converted to the Arian Christianity, or the Nicene one. Clovis the First, king of the Franks, was the first important barbarian ruler to convert to the mainstream church rather than Arianism, allying himself with the papacy. Other tribes, such as the Visigoths, later abandoned Arianism in favor of the established church. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Pope served as a source of authority and continued continuity. Pope Gregory the First, who had served, either he lived or served from the year 540 to the year 604, administered the church with strict reform, and from an ancient senatorial family, Gregory worked with the stern judgment and discipline typical of the Roman ancient rule. Theologically, he represents the shift from the classical to the medieval outlook. His popular writings are full of dramatic miracles, potent relics, demons, angels, ghosts, and the approaching end of the world. If you want to look at Gregory, Pope Gregory the Great, here he is right here. That's a sideways picture. You don't really get a good look at him, but this is in a painting from 1610 in Rome. The Gregory's successors were largely dominated by the exarch of Ravenna, the Byzantine emperors, representatives in the Italian peninsula. Now, these humiliations, the weakening of the Byzantine Empire, and in the face of the Muslim conquest and the inability of the emperor to protect the papal estates against the Lombards, it made Pope Stephen II turn from Emperor Constantine V. Now, he appealed to the Franks to protect his lands. Pepin the Short subdued the Lombards and donated Italian land to the papacy. When Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne 800 as emperor, he established a precedent that in Western Europe no man would be emperor without being crowned by the Pope. Now, the low point of the papacy was between the years of 867 and the year 1049, and this period includes the Crescenti era and the Tusculan papacy and the Saeculum Obscurum. The papacy came under the control of the Mayan political factions, and popes were variously imprisoned. They were starved and killed, and deposed by force. The counts of Tusculum made and unmade popes for 50 years. Pope John XII, the great grandson of one such count, held orgies of debauchery in the Lateran palace. Emperor Otto I had John accused in an ecclesiastical court, which deposed him and elected a layman as Pope Leo the Eighth. John mutilated the imperial representatives in Rome and had himself reinstated as pope. Conflict between the emperor and the papacy continued, and eventually dukes in league with the emperor were buying bishops and popes almost openly. In the year 1049, Leo the Ninth traveled to the major cities of Europe to deal with the church's moral problems firsthand. Notably, simony and clerical marriage and concubinage. With his long journey, he restored the prestige of the papacy in Northern Europe, and from the 7th century, it became common for European monarchies and nobility to find churches and perform investiture or deposition of clergy in their states and fiefdoms. Their personal interest causing corruption among the clergy, and this practice had become common in part because the prelates and the secular rulers were also often participants in public life. Now, to combat this and other practices that had been seen as corrupting, between the years of 900 and the year 1050, centers emerged promoting ecclesiastical reform. The most important being in the Abbey of Cluny, which spread its ideals throughout Europe. And this reform movement gained strength with the election of Pope Gregory the Seventh in the year 1073. Who adopted a series of measures in the movement known as the Gregorian Reform in order to fight strongly against simony and the abuse of civil power, and they tried to restore the ecclesiastical discipline, including clerical celibacy. That's the thing, though, too. If you're depending on what church you go to, and what church you decide to join up with, if you're like a brother or like a father in the church, you're not allowed to have sex. Basically, you're becoming celibate until the day you die. So in the year 1122, this conflict between popes and secular autocratic rulers such as the Holy Roman Emperor Henry the Fourth and King Henry I of England, known as the Investiture Controversy, was resolved by the Concordat of Worms, in which Pope Calixtus II decreed that clerics were to be invested by clerical leaders and temporal rulers by lay investiture. Soon after, Pope Alexander III had begun reforms that would lead to the establishment of canon law. Starting at the beginning of the 7th century, Islamic conquest had succeeded in controlling much of the southern Mediterranean. This was perceived as a threat to Christianity, but in the year 1095, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I of Komnenos asked for military aid from Pope Urban II in the ongoing Byzantine Seljuk Wars. I don't think I know what the fuck that is. The Byzantine Seljuk Wars. Now, Urban at the Council of Clermont called the First Crusade to assist the Byzantine Empire to regain the old Christian territories, especially Jerusalem. With the East and West schism, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church split definitively in the year 1054. Now, this fracture was caused more by political events than by slight divergences of creed. Popes had gulled the Byzantine emperors by siding with the king of the Franks, crowning a rival Roman emperor, appropriating the exarchate of Ravenna, and driving into Greek Italy. Driving in the aspect of driving their forces, not by driving a car, because back then they didn't have cars. In the Middle Ages, popes would constantly struggle with monarchs over power rights. From 1309 to the year 1377, the pope resided not in Rome but in Avignon. The Avignon papacy was notorious for greed and corruption, and during this period, the pope was effectively an ally of the Kingdom of France, alienating France's enemies, such as the Kingdom of England. Now, the Pope was understood to have the power to draw on the treasury of merit built up in the saints and by Christ, so that he could grant indulgences, reducing one's time in purgatory. The concept that a monetary fine or donation accompanied contrition, confession, and prayer eventually gave way to the common assumption that indulgences depended on a simple monetary contribution. The popes condemned misunderstandings and abuses, but they were too pressed for income to exercise effective control over indulgences. Now, popes also contended with the cardinals, who sometimes attempted to assert the authority of Catholic ecumenical councils over the popes. Now, conciliarism holds that the supreme authority of the church lies with the general council, not with the pope itself. Now, its foundations were laid early in the 13th century, and it culminated in the 15th century with John Gerson as its leading as its leading spokesperson. The failure of of the conciliarism to gain broad acceptance after the 15th century is taken as a factor in the Protestant Reformation. Now, various anti-popes challenged the papal authority, especially during the Western Schism, which ran from 1378 to 1417, and it came to a close when the Council of Constance, at the high point of conciliarism, decided among the papal claimants that the Eastern Church continued to decline with the Eastern Rome. The Roman Byzantine Empire undercutting Constantinople's claim to equality with Rome. Twice an Eastern emperor tried to force the Eastern Church to reunify with the West, and first in the Second Council of Lyon from 1272 to 1274, and secondly in the Council of Florence from 1431 to 1449. Papal claims of superiority were a sticking point in reunification, which failed in any event. In the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople and ended the Byzantine Empire. Protestant reformers criticized the papacy as corrupt and characterized the Pope as an antichrist, which he really isn't. Now, popes instituted a Catholic Reformation. So from 1560 to 1648, which addressed the challenges of the Protestant Reformation, and instituted internal reforms. Pope Paul III initiated the Council of Trent from 1545 to 1563, whose definitions of doctrine and whose reforms sealed the triumph of the papacy over elements in the church that sought conciliation with Protestants and opposed papal claims. Now, gradually, it forced to give up secular power to the increasingly assertive European nation states. The popes focused on spiritual issues in 1870. The First Vatican Council proclaimed the dogma of papal infallibility for the most solemn occasions. When the Pope speaks ex cathedra when issuing a definition of faith or morals, and later the same year, Victor Emmanuel II of Italy seized Rome from the Pope's control and substantially completed the unification of Italy. Now, in 1929, the Lateran Treaty between the Kingdom of Italy and the Holy See established the Vatican City as an independent city-state, guaranteeing papal independence from a secular rule. In 1950, Pope Pius XII defined the Assumption of Mary as dogma, the only time a pope has spoken ex cathedra since papal infallibility was explicitly declared. The primacy of St. Peter and the controversial doctrinal basis of the Pope's authority continues to divide the Eastern and the Western churches, and to be separate Protestants from Rome. Now, the writings of several early church fathers contain references to the authority and the unique position held by the bishops of Rome, providing valuable insight into the recognition and significance of the papacy during the early Christian era. Now, these sources attest to the acknowledgement of the Bishop of Rome as an influential figure within the Church, and with some emphasizing the importance of adherence to Rome's teachings and decisions. Such references served to establish the concept of papal primacy and have continued to inform Catholic theology and practice. Now, in his letters, Cyprian of Carthage recognized the Bishop of Rome as the successor of St. Peter in his letter 55, which was written around 251 AD, which is addressed to Pope Cornelius and affirms his unique authority in the early Christian church. Now, Cornelius, the Bishop of Rome, was made bishop by a choice of God and of his Christ. by his favorable witness of almost all the clergy, and by the votes of the people who were present, and by the assembly of ancient priests and good men. And he was made bishop when no one else had been made before him, when the position of Fabian, that is to say, the position of Peter in the office of the bishop's chair, was vacant, but the position once has been filled by the will of God, and that appointment has been ratified by the consent of us all. If anyone wants to be made bishop after that, it has to be done outside the church, and if a man does not uphold the unity of the church's unity, it is not possible for him to have the church's ordination. Now, Irenaeus of Lyons, a prominent Christian theologian of the 2nd century, provided a list of early popes in his work against heresies III. Now, this list covers the period from St. Peter to Pope Eleutherius, who served from 174 to 189 AD. Now, the blessed apostles Peter and Paul, then having founded and built up the church in Rome, committed into the hands of Linus the office of the episcopate. Of this, Linus, Paul makes mention to the epistles to Timothy. To him succeeded Anacletus, and after him, in the third place from the apostles, Clement was allotted the bishopric. And to this Clement, there succeeded Aristarchus. Alexander followed Everitus, and then sixth from the apostles, Sixtus was appointed. After him, Telephorus. And then after Telephorus, he was gloriously martyred. The Hyginus, after him, Pius, and then after him, Anicetus, and Soter, having succeeded Anicetus. Eleutherius does now, and the 20th place from the apostles hold the importance and hold the inheritance of the episcopate. Now, Ignatius of Antioch wrote in his epistle to the Romans that the church in Rome is the church that presides over any love. Now, the church which is beloved and enlightened by the will of him that wills at things which are according to the love of Jesus Christ or God, which also presides in the place of the region of the Romans, worthy of God, worthy of honor, worthy of the highest of happiness, worthy of praise, worthy of obtaining her every desire, and worthy of being deemed holy, and which presides over love is named from Christ and from the Father, which I also salute in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, to those who are united, both according to the flesh and spirit, and to every one of his commandments. Augustine of Hippo, in his letter 53, wrote a list of 38 popes from St. Peter to Siricius. The order of this list differs from the list of Irenaeus and the Pontifico. Augustine's list claims that Linus was succeeded by Clement, and Clement was succeeded by Anacletus, as in the list of Eusebius. While the other two lists switch the positions of Clement and Anacletus. Now, for if the lineal succession of bishops is to be taken into account, with how much more certainty and benefit to the church do we reckon back till we have reached Peter himself, to whom as bearing and figure the whole church, and the Lord said, upon this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, Matthew 16:18, the successor of Peter was Linus, and his successors in unbroken continuity were these, Clement, Anacletus, and Evaristus. Now, an earlier Christian mentions Eusebius mentions Linus as St. Peter's successor and Clement as the third bishop of Rome in his book Church History, which I didn't even know there was a book on church history. As recorded by Eusebius, Clement worked with St. Paul as his co-laborer. As to the rest of his followers, Paul testifies that Crescens were sent to Gaul, but Linus, whom he mentions in the second epistle to Timothy as his companion at Rome, was Peter's successor in the episcopate of the church there. As it has already been shown, Clement also was appointed third bishop of the church at Rome, and was, as Paul testifies, his co-laborer and fellow soldier. Now, Tertullian wrote in his work The Prescription Against Heretics about the authority of the church in Rome. In this work, Tertullian said that the church in Rome has the authority of the apostles because of its apostolistic foundation. Since, moreover, you are close upon Italy, you have Rome, from which there comes even into our own hands, the very authority of apostles themselves. How happy is its church, or on which apostles poured forth all their doctrine along with their blood, where Peter endures a passion like his Lord's will, and where Paul wins his crown in a death like John's, where the apostle John was first plunged unhurt into boiling oil, and then thence remitted into his island exile. Now, according to that same book, Clement of Rome was ordained by Saint Peter as the Bishop of Rome, and for this, um, the manner in which the apostolic churches transmit their registers as the Church of Smyrna, which records that Polycarp was placed therein by John, as also the Church of Rome, which makes Clement to have been ordained in like manner by Peter. Aptatus, the bishop of Melibus in Numidia, which is today's Algeria, and a contemporary of the Donatist schism, presents a detailed analysis of their origins, beliefs, and practices of the Donatists, as well as the events and the debates surrounding the schism. In his book, The Schism of the Donatists, which was written around 367 AD, in the book, Aptatus wrote about the position of the Bishop of Rome in maintaining the unity of the Church. You cannot deny that you are aware that in the city of Rome, the episcopal chair was given first to Peter, and the chair in which Peter sat, the same was also held, was also the head. That is why he is also called Cyphus, meaning rock of all the apostles, the one chair in which unity is maintained by all. Now, the Catholic Church teaches that within the Christian community, the bishops as a body has succeeded the apostles as a body, the apostolic succession, and the Bishop of Rome has succeeded Saint Peter. Scriptural texts proposed in support of Peter's special position in relation to the church include Matthew 16. I tell you, you are Peter, and on his rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Luke 22. Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. And then when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. And John 21. Feed my sheep. Now, the symbolic keys in the papal coats of arms are a reference to the phrase, the keys of the kingdom of heaven, in the first of these texts. Some Protestant writers have maintained that the rock that Jesus speaks of in his text is Jesus himself, or the faith expressed by Peter. This idea is undermined by the biblical usage of Cephas, which is the masculine form of rock in Aramaic, to describe the word Peter, to describe Peter's name. The Encyclopedia Britannica comments that the consensus of the great majority of scholars today is that the most obvious and traditional understanding should be construed, namely that rock refers to the person of Peter. Now, according to the Catholic Church, the Pope is also the new Eliakim, a figure in the Old Testament of the Bible who directed the affairs of the royal court. So similar to like a pope beforehand. They managed the palace staff and handled the state affairs. Isaiah also describes him as having the key to the house of David, which symbolizes his authority and power over all. Now, both Matthew 16 through 19 and Isaiah 22 show similarities between Eliakim and Peter getting keys, which symbolize power. Eliakim gets the power to close and open, while Peter gets the power to bind and loose. According to the book of Isaiah, Eliakim receives the keys and power to close and open doors. I will place the key of the house of David on his shoulder, and what he opens, no one will shut, and what he shuts, no one will be able to open. And here's a fresco of Eliakim in the Sistine Chapel of the Vatican City. You can see that here. Now, according to the book of Matthew, Peter also gets keys and powers to bind and loose. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you lose on earth shall be lost in heaven. Now, in the books of Isaiah 22:3 and Matthew 16:18, both Eliakim and Peter are compared to an object. Eliakim to a peg, a structure that is driven into a wall or other structure to provide support and stability, while Peter is compared to a rock. And I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and he will become a throne of honor to his father's house. Isaiah 22:23, that was from that. In Matthew 16:18, Peter was compared to a rock, and I tell you, you are Peter. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, the Pope was originally chosen by those senior clergymen resident in and near Rome. In the year 1059, the electorate was restricted to the cardinals of the Holy Roman Church, and the individual votes of all cardinal electors were made equal in the year 1179. Now, the electors are now limited to those cardinals who have not reached the age of 80 on the day before the death or resignation of a pope. The pope does not need to be a cardinal elector, nor indeed even a cardinal, since the pope is the bishop of Rome, and the only one who can be ordained a bishop, and the only one who can be ordained a bishop can be elected, which means that any male baptized Catholic is eligible. The last to be elected when not yet a bishop was Gregory the 16th in 1831. The last to be elected when not even a priest was Leo the 10th in 1513, and the last to be elected when not a cardinal was Urban the 6th in 1378. If someone who is not a bishop is elected, he must be given episcopal ordination before the election is announced to the people. And here's a picture of the delivery of the keys. So you got here delivery of keys, and then down here you got the 1417 conclave in Constance, where Pope Martin V was elected. Now, the Second Council of Lyon was convened on May 7th of 1274 to regulate the election of the Pope. It was decreed at this council that the cardinal electors must meet within 10 days of the Pope's death, and that they must remain in seclusion until a Pope has been elected. And this was prompted by the 3-year Cede Vacante following the death of Clement the Fourth in 1268. And by the mid-16th century, the electoral process had evolved into its present form, allowing for a variation in the time between the death of the Pope and the meeting of the cardinal electors. Traditionally, the vote was conducted by acclamation and by selection by committee, or by plenary vote. Acclamation was the simplest procedure, consistent entirely of a voice vote. Since 1878, the election of the Pope has taken place in the Sistine Chapel in a sequestered meeting called a conclave, and so-called the cardinal electors are theoretically locked in conclave, i.e. with key, until they elect a new Pope. These cardinals are chosen by lot to collect the votes of absent cardinal electors by reason of illness, and 3 are chosen by lot to count the votes, and 3 are chosen by lot to review the count of the votes. Now, the ballots are distributed, and each cardinal elector writes the name of his choice on it, and pledges aloud that he is voting for one whom under God I think ought to be elected, before folding and depositing his vote on a plate to top a large chalice placed on the altar. Now, for the chosen 5 papal conclave, a special urn was used for this purpose instead of a chalice and plate, and the plate is then used to drop the ballot into the chalice, making it difficult for electors to insert multiple ballots. And before being read, the ballots are counted while still folded. If the number of ballots does not match the number of electors, the ballots are burned, unopened, and a new vote will be held. Otherwise, each ballot is read aloud by the presiding cardinal, who pierces the ballot with a needle and thread, stringing all the ballots together and tying the ends of the thread to ensure accuracy and honesty. Balloting continues until someone is elected by a 2/3 majority. With the promulgation of universal egregious in 1996, a simple majority after a deadlock of 12 days was allowed. This was revoked by Pope Benedict the 16th by motu proprio in 2007. Now, the dean of the College of Cardinals then asked two solemn questions of the man who has been elected. First, he asked, "Do you freely accept your election as a supreme pontiff?" And if the Pope-elect replies with the word "accepto," his reign begins at that instant. In practice, any cardinal who intends not to accept will explicitly state this before he receives a sufficient number of votes to become Pope. The dean asks next, "By what names shall you be called?" The new Pope announces the regnal name he has chosen. If the dean of the college himself is elected Pope, as was the case in the 2005 conclave with the election of Pope Benedict the 16th, the vice dean performs this task. The new Pope is then led to the Room of Tears, a dressing room where 3 sets of white papal vestments await in 3 sizes. Donning the appropriate vestments and re-emerging into the Sistine Chapel, the new Pope is given the fisherman's ring by the Carmelingo of the Holy Roman Church. The Pope assures a place of honor as the rest of the cardinals wait in turn to offer their first obedience and to receive the blessing of the Pope. Now, one of the most prominent aspects of the papal election process is the means by which the results of each round of voting are announced to the world. Once the ballot papers are counted and bound together, they are burned in a special stove erected in the Sistine Chapel, with the smoke escaping through a small chimney visible from St. Peter's Square. The ballots from an unsuccessful vote are burned along with a chemical compound to create black smoke, or something called fumata nera. Now, traditionally, wet straw was used to produce the black smoke, but this was not completely reliable, and the chemical compound is more reliable than the straw. But when a vote is successful, the ballots are burned alone, sending white smoke through the chimney and announcing to the world the election of a new pope. Starting with the papal conclave of 2005, church bells are also rung as a signal that a new pope has been chosen also. And a short time later, the Cardinal Proto-Deacon announces from a balcony over St. Peter's Square the following proclamation. I announced to you a great joy that we have a new pope. He announces the new pope's Christian name along with his newly chosen regnal or papal name that he chooses. Until 1978, the pope's election was followed in a few days by the papal coronation, which started with a procession with great pomp and circumstance from the Sistine Chapel to St. Peter's Basilica, with the newly elected pope born in the or a carried papal throne. After a solemn papal mass, the new pope was crowned with the papal tiara, and he gave for the first time as pope the famous blessing to the city of Rome and to the New World. Another renowned part of the coronation was the lighting of a bundle of flax at the top of a gilded pole, which would flare brightly for a moment and then promptly extinguish, as he said. Thus passes worldly glory. A similar warning against papal hubris made on the occasion was the traditional exclamation, reminding the newly crowned pope that he would not live to see his rule lasting as long as that of St. Peter. According to tradition, Peter headed the church for 35 years and has thus far been the longest reigning pope in the history of the Catholic Church. Now, nowadays, the newly elected pope celebrates a special mass to inaugurate his papacy with many tens of thousands of Catholic Italy, church clerics and religious and delegations from many nations and other churches across the world in St. Peter's Square. Now, for centuries, starting from the year 1378 and onwards, those elected to the papacy were predominantly Italian. Now, prior to the election of the Polish-born John Paul II in 1978, the last non-Italian was Adrian was Adrian VI of the Netherlands, elected in 1522. John Paul II was followed by election of the German-born Benedict XVI, who was in turn followed by Argentinian-born Francis, the first non-European after 1272. So the first non-European after 1272 years in the first Latin, albeit of Italian ancestry, because like I said, most people that are elected Pope are Italian. Now, the most recent election of Pope Leo XVI, formerly Robert Francis Cardinal Prevost, continues this new tradition of papal selection from a global pool. The current Pope was born and lived until his mid-20s in the United States, is a citizen by naturalization of Peru, where he served as an Augustinian priest and bishop for approximately 20 years, and held by the time of his election, spent almost 20 years in Italy and the Vatican studying and in various church leadership roles. Now, the current regulations regarding a papal interregnum, that is vacant seats, literally while the see is vacant, were promulgated by Pope John Paul II in his 1996 book, document Universi Gregis or whatever. So Sede Vacanti is a papal interregnum, the period between the death or resignation of a pope and the election of a successor. From this term, it's derived the term Sede Vacantism, which designates a category of dissident Catholics who maintain that there is no canonically and legitimately elected pope, and that there is therefore a Sede Vacanti. Now, during this period, the College of Cardinals is collectively responsible for the government of the Church and of the Vatican itself under the direction of the Camerlengo of the Holy Roman Church. Now, canon law specifically forbids the cardinals from introducing any innovation in the government of the Church during the vacancy of the Holy See. Any decision that requires the assent of the Pope has to wait until a new Pope has been elected and accepts an offer. Now, in recent centuries, when a pope was judged to have died, it was reportedly traditional for the Cardinal Camerlengo to confirm the death ceremonially by gently tapping the Pope's head thrice with a silver hammer, calling his birth name each time. This was not done on the deaths of Popes John Paul I and John Paul II. The Cardinal Camerlengo retrieves the ring of the fisherman and cuts it into two. In the presence of the cardinals, the Pope's seals are defaced to keep them from ever being used again, and his personal apartment is sealed. Now, the body lies in the state for several days before being interred in the crypt of a leading church or cathedral. All popes who have died in the 20th and 21st centuries have been interred in St. Peter's Basilica, with the exception of Pope Francis, as he requested to be interred in the Basilica of St. Mary Major. A 9-day period of mourning follows the interment. It's highly unusual for the Pope to resign. The 1983 Code of Canon Law states that if it happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, it is required for validity that the resignation is made freely and properly manifested, but not that it's accepted by anyone. Benedict XVI, who vacated, was the second to resign on the Holy See on February 28th of 2013. He was the most recent to do so, and the first since Gregory the 12th's resignation in 1415. Now, popes always adopt a new name on their accession, known as a papal name in Italian or Latin. Currently, after a new pope is elected and accepts the election, he is called by what name should you be called. The new pope chooses the name by which he will be known from that point on. The senior cardinal deacon, or cardinal proto-deacon, then appears on the balcony of St. Peter's to proclaim the new pope by his birth name and announce his papal name in Latin. It is customary when referring to popes to translate the regional name or the regnal name into local languages. For example, the current pope bears the papal name Pope Leo the 16th of Len, Pope Leon the 16th in Italian, and Pope Leon the 16th in Spanish, and Pope Leo the 16th in English. The Pope's regnal name is not his real name or legal name, but which remains unchanged in legal and governmental documents. Neither is it connected in any way to his real name, but the current Pope was born with the name Robert Francis Provost. Now, the official list of titles of the Pope and the order in which they are given is Bishop of Rome, Vicar of Jesus Christ, Successor of the Prince of the Apostles, Supreme Pontiff of the Universal Church, Patriarch of the West, Primate of Italy, Archbishop and Metropolitan of the Roman Province, Sovereign of the Vatican City, States, and Servant of the servants of God. Those are other names that the Pope is known could be referred to. Now, the best-known title, that of Pope, does not appear in the official list, but it's commonly used in the titles of documents and appears in abbreviated form in their signatures. Thus, Paul the Sixth signed as Paul the Sixth. Sources are divided on the meaning of the letters P and B, with some asserting that it is merely a reference to Papa or Pope, others Pope and Pontiff, and others Shepherd of Shepherds. Now, the title Pope was from the early 3rd century, an honorific designation used for any bishop in the West. In the East, it was used only for Bishop of Alexandria. Marcellinus, in the year 304, is the first bishop of Rome, shown in sources to have had the title Pope used of him. From the early 6th century, it began to be confined to the West, in the West to the Bishop of Rome, a practice that was firmly in place by the 11th century. In Eastern Christianity, where the title Pope is used also of the Bishop of Alexandria, the Bishop of Rome is often referred to as the Pope of Rome, regardless of whether the speaker or writer is in communication with Rome or not. Now, the word Vicar of Jesus Christ is one of the official titles of the Pope given. It is commonly used in the slightly abbreviated form Vicar of Christ, while it is only one of the terms with which the Pope is referred to as a vicar. It is more expressive of his supreme leadership, supreme headship of the Church on earth, which he bears in virtue of the commission of Christ and with vicarial power derived from him, a vicarial power believed to have been conferred on St. Peter when Christ said to him, "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep." Now, the first record of the application of this title to a bishop of Rome appears in a synod of 495, with reference to Gelasius. But at that time, and down to the 9th century, other bishops too referred to themselves as vicars of Christ, and for another 4 centuries, this description was sometimes used of kings and even judges. And it has been used in the 5th and 6th centuries to refer to the Byzantine Empire. Earlier still in the 3rd century, Tertullian used Vicar of Christ to refer to the Holy Spirit in connection with the reforms of Pope Innocent III. As can be observed already in his 1199 letter to Leo I, King of Armenia, other historians suggest that this title was already used in this way in association with the pontificate of Eugene III. Now, this title, Vicar of Christ, is thus not used of the Pope alone, and has been used of all bishops since the early centuries. Now, the Second Vatican Council referred to all bishops as vicars and ambassadors of Christ, and this description of the bishops was repeated by John Paul II in his encyclical something 95. Now, the difference is that the other bishops and vicars of Christ for their own local churches are vicars of Christ for their own local churches, but the Pope is vicar of Christ for the whole church. Now, on at least one occasion, The title Vicar of God, a reference to Christ as God, was used of the Pope. Now, the title Vicar of Peter is used only of the Pope, not of other bishops. Variations of it include Vicar of the Prince of the Apostles, and Vicar of the Apostolic See, and Saint Boniface described Pope Gregory II as Vicar of Peter and the oath of fealty that he took in 722. In today's Roman Missal, the description Vicar of Peter is found also in the collect of the Mass for a saint who was a pope. Now, the term pontiff is derived from the Latin pontifex, which literally means bridge builder, and which designated a member of the principal college of priests in pagan Rome. The Latin word was translated into ancient Greek variously as ancient Greek, or like high priest. The head of the college was known as the Latin Pontifex Maximus, which means the greatest pontiff. Now, in Christian use, pontifex appears in the Vulgate translation of the New Testament to indicate the high priest of Israel. Now, the term came to be applied to any Christian bishop, but since the 11th century, it commonly refers specifically to the Bishop of Rome, who was more strictly called the Roman Pontiff. The use of the term to refer to bishops in general is reflected in the terms Roman Pontifical, a book containing rites reserved for bishops, such as confirmation and ordination, and pontificals, the insignia of bishops. Now, although the description servant of the servant of God was also used by other church leaders, including Augustine of Hippo and Benedict of Nursia, it was first used extensively as a papal state by Gregory the Great, reportedly as a lesson in humility for the Patriarch of Constantinople. John the Pastor, who had assumed the title ecumenical patriarch, it became reserved for the Pope in the 12th century and is used in papal bulls and several important papal documents. Now from 1863 to 2005, and again in 2024, the Pontifical also included the title Patriarch of the West. Now, this title was first used by Pope Theodore and Pope Theodore I in the year 642. It was only used occasionally. Indeed, it did not begin to appear in the Pontifical Yearbook until 1863. On March 22nd of 2006, the Vatican released a statement explaining this omission on the grounds of expressing historical and theological reality and of being useful to a dialogue. Now, the title Patriarch of the West symbolized the Pope's special relationship with and jurisdiction over the Latin Church, and the omission of the title neither symbolizes in any way a change in this relationship, nor does it distort the relationship between the Holy See and the Eastern churches. As solemnly proclaimed by the Second Vatican Council, Patriarch of the West was reintroduced to the Pope's list of titles in the 2024 edition of the Pontifical. The Vatican has not made any statements explaining why the title has been brought back into use. Other titles of the Pope used are His Holiness, either used alone or as an honorific prefix in His Holiness Pope Leo, and as Your Holiness as a form of address, and Holy Father in Spanish and Italian. Most Blessed Father in Spanish is often used in preference to Santismo, which means Most Holy Father in the medieval period. Dominus Apostolicus, the apostolistic Lord, were also used. Now, Pope Francis signed some documents with his name alone, either in Latin, Franciscus, as an encyclical dated back on June 29th of 2013, or in another language. Other documents he signed in accordance with the tradition of using Latin and only including the abbreviated form PP for the Latin word pope. Popes who have been an ordinal numeral in their name traditionally placed placed the abbreviation PP before the ordinal numeral, as in Leo as in Leo the Pope the 16th, except in papal bulls of canonization and decrees of ecumenical councils, which a pope signs with the formula. Ego and Episcopus Ecclesiae Catholic Church without the numeral as in Ego Leo Episcopus Ecclesiae Catholic. Now, each pope has a regalia and insignia. Ring of the fisherman, a gold or gilt ring, decorated with the depiction of Saint Peter in a boat casting his nets with the pope's name around it. Umbrellicum, better known in the Italian form umbrellino, is a canopy of or umbrella consisting of alternating red and gold stripes, which used to be carried above the pope in processions. Sedia Gestoria, a mobile throne carried by 12 footmen in red uniforms, accompanied by two attendants bearing the flabella, fans made of white ostrich feathers, and sometimes a large canopy carried by 8 attendants. The use of the flabella was discontinued by Pope John Paul I. The use of the Sedia Gestoria was discontinued by Pope John Paul II. And heraldry, each pope has his own personal coat of arms, and though unique for each pope, the arms have for several centuries been traditionally accompanied by 2 keys and cells higher, i.e., crossed over one another so as to form an X behind the behind the shield, 1 silver key and 1 gold key, tied with a red cord, and above them a silver trignium with 3 gold crowns and red lappets, which are 2 strips of fabric hanging from the back of the trignium, which fall over the neck and shoulders when worn. This is blazoned, 2 keys and satire, saltire, and or an argent interlacing in the rings, or beneath a tiara argent crowned of. Now, the 21st century has seen departures from this tradition, but until 2005, the Pope Benedict XVI, while maintaining the cross keys behind the shield, omitted the papal tiara from his personal coat of arms, replacing it with a mitre with 3 horizontal lines. Beneath the shield, he added the pallium, a papal symbol of authority more ancient than the tiara, and the use of which is also granted to metropolitan archbishops as a sign of communion with the See of Rome. Although the tiara was omitted in the Pope's personal coat of arms, the coat of arms of the Holy See, which includes the tiara, remained unaltered. In 2013, Pope Francis maintained the mitre that replaced the tiara but omitted the pallium. Now, the flag most frequently associated with the Pope is the yellow and white flag of Vatican City, with the arms of the Holy See and blazoned goals, 2 keys, and saltire, and an argent interlacing in the rings, or beneath a tiara argent crowned or on the right hand side the fly, and the white half of the flag, the left hand side. The hoist is yellow. The Pope's echelon does not appear on the flag, but this flag was first adopted in 1808, whereas the previous flag had been red and gold, although Pope Benedict XVI replaced it with a mitre on his personal coat of arms, and has been retained on the flag ever since. Pope Pius V is often credited with having originated the custom whereby the Pope wears white by continuing after his election to wear the white habit of the Dominican order. In reality, the basic papal attire was white long before then. The earliest document that it describes is such as the Ordo the 13th, a book of ceremonies compiled in about 1274. Later books of ceremonies describe the Pope as wearing a red mantle, a mazzetta, a kamaru, and shoes, and a white cassock and stockings. Many contemporary portraits of 15th and 16th century predecessors of Pope Pius V show them wearing a white cassock similar to his. The status and authority of the Pope in the Catholic Church was dogmatically defined by the First Vatican Council on July 18th, 1870, in its dogmatic Constitution of the Church of Christ. The council established the following canons. Now, if anyone says that the blessed Apostle Peter was not established with the Lord Christ as the chief of all the apostles and the visible head of the whole militant church, or that the same period received great honor, but did not receive from the same our Lord Jesus Christ directly and immediately, the primacy is in true and proper jurisdiction. Let him be an anathema, whatever the fuck that means. If anyone says that it is not from an institution of the Christ the Lord himself, or by divine rights, that the blessed Peter has perpetual successors in the primacy over the universal church, or that the Roman pontiff is not the successor or blessed on Peter in the same primacy, let him be an anathema, and then so on and so on. Now, the Pope's official seat is in the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, considered to be the cathedral of the Diocese of Rome. The Pope's official residence is the Apostolic Palace, but he also possesses a summer residence at the Castle of Gandolfo, situated in the site of the ancient city of Alba Longa. Now, the names Holy See and the Apostolic See are ecclesiastical terminology for the ordinary jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome, including the Roman Curia. The Pope honors powers and privileges within the Catholic Church and the international community derived from the Episcopate of Rome in lineal succession from the St. Peter, one of the 12 apostles. Now, consequently, Rome was traditionally has traditionally occupied a central position in the Catholic Church, although this is not necessarily so. The Pope derives his pontificate from being the Bishop of Rome, but is not required to live there. According to the Latin formula, wherever the Pope resides is the central government of the Church. Between 1309 and 1378, the popes lived in Avignon, France, a period often called the Babylonian captivity, in allusion to the biblical narrative of Jews of the ancient kingdom of Judah, living as captives of Babylonia. Of course, the Pope does get a salary and benefits. As of 2024, the Pope's salary was $30,000 per month. Francis, a Jesuit, refused to collect a salary, and he donated his money to the poor. Now, the Catholic Church traditionally covers the cost of all the Pope's meals, housing, apparel, transports, e.g., the Pope-mobile, security, housing, housekeeping, and healthcare. The Pope has free access to Vatican medical services and a private pharmacy. If the Pope retires, the monthly pension as of 2024 would be $3,000 per month, or damn near it. Now, although the Pope is the diocese bishop of Rome, he delegates most of the day-to-day work of leading the diocese to the cardinal vicar, who assures direct episcopal oversight and of the diocese's pastoral needs, not in his name, but in that of the Pope. Now, the most recent cardinal vicar was Angelo de Donatis, who served from 2017 until 2024. The current cardinal vicar is right now a guy named Baldassare Regno. There are people that will protest popes being selected, but that's up to you guys to decide. We don't get to pick it out here, but Italy does. Also, popes have the same thing as presidents do, where they have term limits on how long they can serve. We'll find that out here in a minute. Now, when it comes to the Pope's claim to authority, it could either be disputed or rejected outright by other churches for various different reasons. Now, there's only been some popes who have served longer than 10 years, but the longest papal reigns of those who reign lamps can be determined from contemporary historical data are followed. St. Peter had the longest, 38 years. Pius the Ninth for 31 years. St. Paul II for 26 years. Leo the 13th for 25 years. Pius the 6th, 24 years. Adrian the 1st, 23 years. Pius the 7th, 23 years. Alexander the 3rd, 21 years. Saint Sylvester the 1st, 21 years also, and Saint Leo the 1st for 21 years. During the Western Schism, Pope Benedict the 13th had ruled for 28 years. Okay, that is the end of our video here. So next week, I will put up another video, depending on what I decide to do on that one. So this is the video about the Pope. If you like the video about the Pope and you like history videos, make sure to give a like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty the King, for more videos like this. I love doing my history videos because history is a very important thing in the world. And so next week, we will probably talk about... Let's see here what I got up here. We got Alexander Pierce, Barabbas, Showman's Rest, which is a cemetery, Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, New York Times building, Chrysler building, Eiffel Tower, damn it, Wendigo. Then you got World War II, which I still have not figured out that, have not done that one yet, but I need to. And then you got Elizabeth Bathory, Dinosaur, Ice Age, Human History, Ku Klux Klan, London, Coyote, Werewolf, Italy, Africa, Gangs of New York, Pirates, and 80 Years War. So more than likely I will do a video on the Eiffel Tower, which is France, for next week. So like I said, if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, Rusty the King, and I hope to see you guys next week. And leave a comment, let me know what you guys thought about the video.